my name is Ann Kent. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and the owner of Peas and Happiness. We are back in my kitchen today to do a little bit of show and tell. I'm going to show you some of my different pots and pans and explain the difference between them. A lot of times the recipe will call for a sauté pan or a skillet or a pot or a saucepan, and you may be wondering what exactly this is and if you need to use that specific tool. Honestly, the answer is sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So I'll walk you through when you may be able to interchange these and when you might need to really specifically use a specific pot or pan in your kitchen. If you'd like, you can refer to the blog post on this. I've described everything pretty in depth in there, and also have links to some of my favorite kitchen options if you are looking to upgrade or looking to maybe refresh your kitchen a little bit. So let's go ahead and dive into the difference first between a skillet and a sauté pan. These two are often used interchangeably. Let me first show you the difference. So these are some of my most used items in the kitchen. This is a skillet. You can tell that it's a skillet because it's wide and shallow and it has sloped edges. So this is really good for either flipping. So if you have something like almonds that you're toasting, you can really easily flip those. This is also used for to make an omelet, to make scrambled eggs, things like that. You're going to use a skillet primarily for dry heat cooking, so things that don't necessarily need a lot of liquid or that you're going to evaporate out. Skillets do not typically come with a lid, and that's because we are promoting evaporation when we're using them. In contrast, a sauté pan tends to be a little bit bigger. Both of these come in various sizes. So you can have a very large skillet, very small one, large sauté pan, or a small one. But this differs in that the sides of a sauté pan are perpendicular instead of sloped. So it is also very wide and very shallow, as you can see, but because it has these perpendicular sides, it is not as easy to flip. So we're not going to be able to toss things, make crepes, things like that. It's going to work better for dishes that are one dish meals, for example, that you cook everything in the same pot. It does come with a lid, and so if you have a recipe that you need to keep in the liquid, that's going to work better than a skillet. So most of the time you can use these interchangeably, but there are a few items, like I was saying, like the one dish meals, you're really going to need to use a sauté pan because it's going to keep everything in it better versus a skillet. I do also want to point out one of my all-time favorite pans is a cast iron skillet. Now, even though this is called a skillet, and it does have, you can sort of see the sloped sides, they're not as sloped as the other skillet I was showing you, and cast iron skillets are really, really heavy. So even though it's called a skillet, it's going to function a lot more like a sauté pan, and that's how I would recommend to use that. You can find cast iron skillets that come with a lid or that don't, so depending on what you plan to use it for, that may be a good option for you. Okay, the second thing that we're going to talk about is the difference between a saucepan and a pot. So these oftentimes are kind of mixed up, but the basic difference is that a pot is typically larger. It's going to be very tall and deep and have two looped handles, you can see. So there's all kinds of different pots. There's Dutch ovens, there's stock pots, there's crock pots, but a pot typically means it has these two handles and it is very large. It also comes with a lid to prevent a lot of evaporation. A saucepan is typically a little bit smaller. It also can be larger, but the main difference is that it has this one handle, and that's what really differentiates it. It also comes with a lid. And so some of these things can be used interchangeably. For example, you could cook pasta in either a pot or a saucepan, and basically it's just the amount that we're talking about. But pots are really good for foods that you don't want a lot of evaporation to occur. So things like soups that maybe you're cooking for a very long time, chilies, stews, sauces, those are going to be used. When I say sauces, I mean like big sauces, like marinara sauce that you are making in large quantity and then cooking for a very long amount of time, that you don't want to evaporate too quickly. Saucepans, on the other hand, it's in the name. Their primary use is to make sauce, so think bechamel sauce or a gravy. That would be another example of a sauce that you would use in this. So typically smaller amounts of liquid. You can also boil pasta or things like that if you just don't need a large quantity and want the water to boil faster. It's also going to boil pretty fast because it's a smaller utensil. So again, some things are interchangeable, but primarily we're talking about the difference in size, and then if you are cooking something that's going to be cooking a very long amount of time, you're going to want to use a pot, whereas those shorter cooking times, the sauces, you're going to be using a saucepan. All right, let's talk a little bit about baking now, because that's also very, very common, and there are a lot of different kinds of baking dishes. In fact, we're not even going to go over all of them. There are just too many. I'm going to go over the primary ones, which are a baking dish versus a baking sheet versus a cookie sheet. So a baking dish, typically, this is what is referred to as a baking dish. This is a 9 by 13 pan. That's a very standard size for a casserole dish. These are going to be used for things like lasagna, sometimes like other baked pasta dishes. Sometimes you can bake meat in these if you would like. It's pretty versatile. You can roast vegetables and things like that. Typically they're made of glass, but you can also find these in a lot of different types of substance. So this is my aluminum baking pan. I use this more for things like cake. But you could also roast vegetables. You can use this for things like lasagna. Keep in mind that the thickness of the pan will make a difference in the cooking time. So this aluminum pan is very light. It's going to heat up more quickly and cook things a little bit more quickly. The glass baking dish is a little bit thicker, more heavy, and so it's going to take a little bit longer to heat. Now, in contrast to those baking dishes, probably one of my most used pans in my kitchen is my half baking sheet. So if you talk about a baking sheet, this is used in commercial kitchens. A full baking sheet is actually twice this big, and you can see that this is pretty large. So this is a standard size of a half baking sheet. If you order one on Amazon, this is the size that you'll want. They also come in quarter baking sheets, which is literally half of a half. So if you need something a little bit smaller, you have a small oven, that's what you could do. This is my favorite pan for roasting vegetables. This is great for one pan sheet meals and things like that. And you can see that its benefit is that it has a very shallow edge here. So if I'm roasting vegetables, they're not going to slide off the edge. I'm not going to drip any oil off into the oven. But there's a lot more space than what you'll see on in my baking dish. So this is going to allow me to get a lot more surface area and allow some more evaporation to happen, which will make for crispier roasted vegetables, which is typically going to be a little bit tastier. Okay, so the difference between a baking sheet and a cooking sheet is basically the lip. So this is a typical cookie sheet. You can see that my pans are very well used, they're all dirty. But a cookie sheet is really primarily just used for that. So it's not going to be as good for things like one pan sheet meals or vegetables, because any of those things that you're turning over and or have some oil in them that could slide off the edge, you're going to want to avoid a pan like this for that reason. Some cookie sheets do have a very small edge, but a baking sheet is really what you're going to really be looking for if you're going to want to do some of those more sheet pan meals and roasting vegetables and things like that. So again, there's a lot of overlap in some of these different kitchen items, and honestly, there's a lot of sets that are sold that have pans that you may use once or twice, but you don't necessarily need to invest in a set that has a lot of specialty pans. These that we're looking at can do 99% of the cooking in the kitchen. These are the pans that I'm really using most often. So if you are looking to upgrade or you want some recommendations, again, check my blog post, because I do have links to all of these different items, the ones that I would recommend. If you have questions about these, or if you have other kitchen items that you are wondering about, especially if there's in a recipe that is saying that you need this specific thing, drop a comment and I would love to have a conversation about if that's really important or if there's maybe a substitute that you can use. So thank you for joining me back in my kitchen. I hope this was helpful. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment below and I'd be happy to get back with you. So thank you for joining, and I look forward to catching you again soon. Take care.